All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today we are going to be continuing exploring the realm of the classless by checking out the Sultansworn Paladin. Now, quick reminder, if you are enjoying this content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things really help with the discoverability of this video. So please do all those things. Here is another class that I've played, though I've actually only leveled a paladin up to mid-50s. And the interesting thing about it is my main character I play in Final Fantasy XIV, Aether is the character's name, based off of my monk. Does not have any levels in Paladin at all. What happened was a friend of mine started playing Final Fantasy XIV on a different data center, and so I wanted to be able to help them out as they were going through the leveling process. So I went to that other data center and I made a new character, and because she was playing a healer class, I'm like, well, she's going to need a tank when she starts doing good group content. And she's a streamer, and so she had tons of people doing it for her. But I'm like, you know what? I might as well. And I've wanted to try out the Paladin anyway. And so I started a new character, and I started as whatever. It's not Marauder, because Marauder turns into the Warrior. But whatever the Paladin starting job is, I started that. And I leveled it all the way up through 50. Doing the main story quest, the revamped main story quest, that I had fun with. I think it only took me like a week-ish, playing maybe a couple hours a day, and not every single day, to get through the base of Realm Reborn stuff. I don't think I ever got through the patches of A Realm Reborn, because that part's just super long. But yeah, so I've gotten through the level 50 paladins. This is stuff. I like tanks, and that's what the Paladin is in Final Fantasy XIV. The Paladin is the original tank. For the kind of generic party that is shown in all of the cutscenes and the things like that for the Warrior of Light. The Warrior of Light themselves starts actually as an archer, and then picks up the Warrior class, and goes through a bunch of different classes. In Heavensward, he picks up Dragoon. In Stormblood, he picks up both Monk and Samurai. In Shadowbringers, he picks up Dark Knight. And then for Endwalker, he's picking up the Paladin. But for the other characters in his party, which eventually become the Warriors of Darkness that you deal with in both Heavensward and then again in Shadowbringers in various ways. They actually had a party of 5, which isn't a thing in Final Fantasy XIV. I never understood that. They had a party of 5, and their tank for it, because the Warrior of Light, the quote-unquote main character, for whatever reason, because he's always changing classes, I'm just assuming, is never recognized as the tank of the party. He's just the cool guy that does all the awesome badass stuff. But they had a paladin for their tank, and then they had a black mage, a white mage, and then I believe a bard was the last member of their 5-person team. And it's a cool group, and it's a cool thing. But it just kind of goes to show you, paladins are the traditional tanks that you would see in MMOs in general. Paladins show up in a lot of different MMOs. Paladins show up in RPGs constantly. Paladins have been a part of D&D, I believe, since its inception, or at least since first edition. I don't think they were a base class in original D&D, because that was its own other thing. But Paladin showed up very, very early on. There is a lot of history and lore for Paladins in general. If I remember correctly, the actual term Paladin is in reference to Knights of Charlemagne, who was a very famous, I believe, French king, and embodied the idea of chivalry and the things like that. So Paladins are a big deal, and they have been a big deal for a remarkably long amount of time. As far as the Paladin in Final Fantasy XIV, there are 4 different tanks. We have covered 2 of them thus far. We've covered the Gunbreaker, which is the newest tank, my personal favorite tank because I really enjoy playing a Gunbreaker. We've covered the Dark Knight, which is also a super, super awesome, fun tank. They use a big old massive greatsword, and if you want to play that edgelord character, that is what the Dark Knight is. Also, the Dark Knight has the greatest class quests of the entire game. The person that actually wrote the storyline for Shadowbringers, which anyone that plays Final Fantasy XIV, or most people at least, agrees that Final Fantasy Shadowbringers is the best Final Fantasy XIV storyline that has been written so far. Well, the person that wrote it wrote the Dark Knight class quests and their storyline, so you know it's good. The Paladin, the warrior, is a reference back to the original Final Fantasy, where your 6 base classes, one of them was warrior, and it eventually would get upgraded to knight. Paladin, the term Paladin itself didn't really show up until a couple translations into the things like that. I think at one point for Final Fantasy III, the upgraded the knight class was referred to as a paladin for a little bit, but officially it shows up in Final Fantasy IV, is where the paladin first shows up, and that's where they get a lot of their they technically have all the abilities from or basically have the abilities of the knight from Final Fantasy I, where it is basically a weapons-based class that also gets access to some low-level white magic. And as they kind of evolved, they changed from just, a weapons-based class that also could cast some white magic spells to a little bit more of a defensive powerhouse along with a little bit of offensive white magic. But for the most part, they were very defensive. They were designed to take hits. Their specific class ability was called Cover, where literally if someone was in a certain low hit point range, they would go over and they would take attacks for them. It really has always been about being the tank for the Paladin class in Final Fantasy XIV. Now, when we look at the Paladin class in D&D, it has been very, very different. The Paladin class in D&D is based entirely, almost entirely around role-playing. It was one of the few classes that were, I think it is the only class that for a while was limited to only one alignment, which was lawful good. You could not be a paladin of any other alignment. You always had to be lawful good. And in certain versions of D&D, I know in 3rd edition, there were some rules as far as party members that could work together as far as their alignments were concerned, to where in some, I don't know if these were house rules or just optional rules or something. In some optional rules, your adventuring party could not deviate more than one space away from each other. So if you had someone that was true neutral, that would mean everybody in the party had to have neutral in their title somehow, because that had to be it. If you had someone that was neutral good, the party could only exist of lawful good, neutral good, chaotic good, and true neutral. So yeah, the Paladin was unique in the idea that it was limited to a single. It was limited to a single alignment, which I think either druids or monks at one point they tried to limit to being only to the true neutral, but they relaxed it pretty quickly to being any neutral aligned aspect. So it was unique in that, and the Paladin themselves was really the only class, aside maybe from clerics in very specific instances, where your class abilities could be taken away for just making the wrong choice in game. If you went against the tenets of your faith, you could lose all of your Paladin abilities. And depending on the version of the edition that you're talking about, there were various ways you could go about. Some, and it depended on your DM and the world you were in and everything. There were some that, if you broke your tenets as a paladin, congratulations, you are done being a paladin. You can never gain another paladin level. You can't cast paladin spells anymore. Pick a new class and start, basically from level 1 while everyone else is level 8 or 9 or something. And then other ones where you'd have to go through penance and things like this. And so it is, Paladins themselves, as far as D&D concerned, have always been a heavily role-play focused class. A lot of their abilities, even their mechanical, like combat abilities, have links to role-playing choices. So anytime you're talking about the Paladin in D&D, you have to talk about the lore and the role-playing behind the class, simply because you can't not. Like, the class is so intrinsically linked with it, whereas something like a fighter is not. The role-playing is not a main focus of the fighter class in general. You can really be anything you want, make any choices you want. No choices you make, like if your alignment changes as a fighter, it's never going to affect what abilities you have. If your alignment changes as a paladin, it might. It might turn you into an Oathbreaker, which completely changes how you play your paladin. So yeah. As far as how is it going to relate, again, we're taking a tank class and we're going to translate it into a class that the Paladin in 5th edition is not. I wouldn't call the Paladin a quote unquote tank class. It can fill that role really, really well. But the nice thing about D&D in general is there is no single role any class has to fill. Even something like a cleric, which most people, when they think of clerics in D&D, they think of, you're the healer. That's all you do is you heal. In 5th edition D&D, no. I ran a campaign for like 4 or 5 years where their heaviest damage dealer was their cleric, because it was a death cleric. And he could out damage literally every other character in the game. And they had a rogue, they had a barbarian that was really, really good at rolling insanely high. And yeah, it was this really, really, really powerful damage dealing cleric. And you can build clerics to be melee focused, and there's so many different ways to build them. So that's the nice thing about this. Now, if you watched my previous video on the monk, I mentioned how monks are not damage dealers, and so how can you say? Well, again, it's because the class is designed a completely different way. The Paladin is designed that it can be a very good kind of defender tank style class. It can also be a very good offensive class as well, that focus mainly on doing damage and things like that. The monk is just a different play style that doesn't lend itself well to that. So yeah. So let's jump into this. First, as I try always to do, Quick refresher on 5e class design. In 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, every class is designed to play very, very differently right from the beginning. In order to do that, every class has what we call defining features. These are abilities that are either unique to the class, or aren't specifically unique, but the class gets them earlier or can use them in a different way than other classes that get that ability. In order for something to be a defining feature, it has to show up within the first 2 levels. So what are the defining features of the Paladin? Well, they technically have 3, but one of them I personally don't really consider a defining feature because of just how infrequently I see it used. But it is a defining feature because it's effectively exclusive to monks. Rangers get something kind of similar but different. It's called Divine Sense, which basically what Divine Sense is it allows them to sense specific kinds of creatures, celestial, fae, or undead, within 60 feet of them. So basically, within 60 feet, they can tell if there are any celestials, fiends, or undead, and they know where they are. So if they're invisible ghosts or something like that, a paladin can use this action to sense them and know exactly where they are. They can also sense consecrated or desecrated locations. And in combat, it is almost never used. There are very few situations where it's actually beneficial to use your action for Divine Sense. Out of combat, though, it's a really cool ability, and people just don't use it. And I really think they should, because there's a lot of information you can get. And Celestials, Fiends, and Undead is a really large group of enemies. So yeah, that is one of their defining features. But the other thing about Channel Divinity is it is never touched, or not Channel Divinity, Divine Sense. It is never touched again in the rest of the class and none of the subclass options do anything with Channel Divinity. None of the class options do anything with Channel Divinity. So it just kind of exists. So that's one of the reasons why I kind of don't really consider it a defining feature, because other than getting it at first level, you can almost forget about it as far as everything else. The rest of this stuff does change and get better. The second defining feature, which is a defining feature since Paladins were introduced, is called Lay on Hands. Lay on Hands, they get a pool of hit points that they can touch someone as an action and just dump into them. It is a healing ability. It doesn't require any rolling. There are no saves, anything like that. They literally just go up to someone, put their hands on them, and give them free hit points. It's another thing that a lot of Paladin players kind of take for granted, because it does take your action, and some of the flashier Paladin abilities take your action as well, or require, attacks in order to do. So a lot of people undervalue it, but you really can't undervalue the ability to just give out free hit points on it to touch, and there's no way to stop it. You can't have it counterspelled. You can't have it blocked by an anti-magic field or something like that. It is just an ability that they can do. They can also use it to cure poison and diseases and things like that by doing chunks of hit points. But as they get higher and higher, their hit point pool gets bigger. So you basically have 5 hit points per paladin level. So by a 20th level paladin has 100 hit points per day that they can just give out. So it's really, really nice and useful. And then finally, the final defining feature of the Paladin is called Divine Smite. And this is the one that everybody salivates over for the Paladin. Basically, whenever you hit with an attack, you can burn a spell slot to add additional radiant damage to the attack. It starts off as an additional 2d8 radiant damage for a first level spell slot, and for each higher level spell slot you burn, you do more damage, up to a maximum of 5d8 damage. If you Divine Smite an undead creature, you do an additional d8 of damage. So if the creature's type is undead, automatically it starts at 3d8 and goes up to 6d8 damage. The nice thing about the Divine Smite is the fact that in 5th edition, when you hit critically, you double the number of dice you roll for damage, which means if you hit and you crit, because you choose to Divine Smite after you find out if you hit, it means you choose to Divine Smite after you find out whether or not you crit. And if you crit, instead of adding an additional 2d8, you would add an additional 4d8. Or if it is an undead and you burn a 4th level spell slot, you would put on an additional 12d8 damage on a crit. Paladins are burst damagers. A lot of them save most of their spells for their smiting because of how effective it is. And generally, anytime a paladin crits with an attack, they will almost always put a Divine Smite, because even a 1st level spell slot is an additional 4d8 damage. It is a ton of damage. So yeah, that's the defining features of the Paladin. Again, none of those specific defining features really lend themselves to the idea of being a kind of tank defender. But because Paladins have proficiency in all armor, up to and including heavy armor, and proficiency in shields, they can play that sword and board character really, really well. And depending on the subclass you choose, you can really reinforce that defender archetype. So yeah, let's dive into the Oath of the Sultansworn. So the first thing we have to talk about, because I mentioned before, these are very important aspects of the Paladin, is the tenets of their oath, the role-playing reasons behind becoming a particular Paladin. Every Paladin subclass, the first thing they have in their subclass is their tenets, which are anywhere from about 3 to 4 or 5 basically words generally, or ideals that are intrinsic to that particular subclass. To give you an example, there are actually 2 subclasses that I picked out specifically because they are both defender-oriented Paladin subclasses. The Oath of Redemption, and what is the other one? I believe, the Oath of the Crown. Both of those are built on... mechanically, they're built to be a little bit more defensive, a little bit more on protecting your allies. So the tenets for the Oath of Redemption are peace, innocence, patience, and wisdom. And after each tenet, it will give you a brief description. Like, for innocence, all people begin life in an innocent state, and it is their environment or their influence of the influence of dark forces that drives them to evil. By setting the proper example and working to heal the wounds of a deeply flawed world, you can set anyone on a righteous path. For the Oath of the Crown, the 4 tenets are law, loyalty, courage, and responsibility. And to give you an example, for loyalty, the tenet is, your word is your bond. Without loyalty, oaths and laws are meaningless. The thing with these is they're meant to be very definitive. They're meant to make a statement, but the statement itself generally tends to have enough interpretation room that not every single Paladin of the Crown is going to be exactly the same. They're going to be able to make different decisions. Like, one of the tenets of the Crown is law. The law is paramount. It is the mortar that holds the stones of civilization together, and it must be respected. Okay, well, in a situation where they're having to make the choice between particular laws, because as anyone that has studied law knows, laws interact with each other in weird ways. It's the reason we have a judicial system, is judges are there specifically to interpret laws, and when they do interfere with each other, they get to decide which law supersedes the other one and which law is right or unright. The entire branch of law called constitutional law is entirely built along the idea of laws that supersede other and laws that contradict each other. Constitutional law is based entirely around the idea of the Constitution is the highest law of the land in the U.S., and therefore any law that comes into conflict with the Constitution always has to be deferred to. And so when you start studying constitutional law, you start seeing really interesting interpretations of laws that you wouldn't think interfered with the Constitution at all, going, well, no, the Constitution says this, and this particular right is granted to you by this portion of the Constitution, and this law, if interpreted in this particular way, could infringe upon this right, and therefore we cannot allow this law to be interpreted that way, because the only reason laws ever go before judges is when something happens that is bad because of a law. So the law effectively has to do something wrong before a judge will see it. Almost exclusively. Every so often there are kind of preeminent things where they say, well, the law could be interpreted this way, and there's things with standing and other doctrine that gets really, really complicated. But the reason I'm talking about all this law and stuff like that is the idea of the law, well, eventually a paladin is going to have to make the choice between conflicting laws. Especially things like if a paladin, because like Faerun in the Forgotten Realms is a collection of city-states. Each city-state is going to have different laws, and if you're a paladin of the crown that is dedicated to Neverwinter, and you are in Waterdeep, well, they have different laws and different things, and you have to make the decision at that point of, okay, are you going to follow the law of the country you came from? Are you going to respect the laws of the country the city-state that you are currently in? Do you have laws of a deity? Maybe the deity that has given the authority to the ruler that you pledged yourself to as a paladin of the crown. Are you going to defer to your are you going to defer to your king as opposed to your deity? Things like that. Like, there's a lot of interpretation into these really tiny things. So, going back to the Sultansworn, what are the tenets of the Sultansworn? Well, the tenets of the Sultansworn are shield, sword, and armor, which are not ideals. They are objects. This is the first issue I have with this. Now, again, I'm not as up-to-date on the lore of the Paladin in Final Fantasy XIV as I am with some of the other ones, just because it's been a while since I played my Paladin. And again, I was rushing through a lot of it so that I could keep pace with my friend. So I wasn't paying super close attention to the class guides. And I've never done a deep dive into Paladin lore in Final Fantasy beyond this. But for me, the tenets of the Sultansworn completely miss the mark and completely misunderstand what paladins are in 5th edition. Your tenets cannot be objects. Shield, sword, armor just don't really work. If you read the descriptions, they give you a little bit better. Shield, your leader is a beacon who will guide the land to prosperity, protect them at all costs. This is another thing that is very, very specific. Shield means you protect a specific person. Not you protect everyone, not you protect whom you think deserves protection. You, the tenet of your faith, which is where paladins get their strength, is their devotion to a deity or a cause or something like that. Your devotion is to this one person, and that's all that matters. The only thing that matters is you protect this one person. It's not a very paladin thing. It doesn't really leave any room for interpretation for different characters about how they want to do that. It just says, you protect the king. That's it. Even, again, tenets of the crown, where they are devoted to the government, effectively, to their king, does not say, you protect the king. It is a much more broad interpretation of you follow the law, not the king. Sword. You are the sword which will protect and enforce their ideals. Again, doesn't really mean anything. This at least is better than you protect this one person and nothing else matters. The next one is sword. You're a sword. Doesn't really mean anything. And you're a weapon that protects. Okay. Now, I am a huge believer in the idea of swords can be defensive as well as offensive weapons. I've studied swordplay. I've studied a lot of different swordplay from katana work and I can't remember what it's called anymore. I've studied work with Japanese katana martial arts and things like that. For the life of me, I can't remember what it's called. The only thing I can think of is Bushido, which is a paladin oath, to be honest. It's a set of ideals, and I think it also refers to the actual martial art of using a katana as well, but I can't remember. But I've studied that. I've studied a little bit of European swordplay. I've studied fencing. A lot. Like I've studied swordplay extensively. I've had stage combat training specifically in stage fencing and other forms of stage swordplay, of which there are many. Swords are just as much an offensive and as a defensive weapon. And one of my favorite things to kind of throw in the face of people like, well, dual wielding doesn't exist. That's not a real thing. The Florentine style of fencing is fencing with a pair of rapiers. And one of the tenets of the Florentine style is one of your rapiers is always used for defense, while the other one is used to attack. And which one is the defending rapier and which one is the attacking rapier is constantly changing depending on the situation you're in. But they are simultaneously used to attack and defend at the same time. And depending on the treatises that you read on it, they've actually been said that the Florentine style of fencing is an essential part of learning how to fence, to the point where it is the first thing you should learn after you master single sword fencing. Before you get into any other styles of fencing, like fencing with a dagger and rapier, or buckler and rapier, which were extremely common ways to fence. So yeah, I like the idea that a sword is protected in force, is both offensive and defensive. But again, a tenet is not an item. And that really, as much as I said, yeah, it should be broad, that is so broad and undefined. Like, it's not really broad at that point. That is undefined as to what being a sword means. And then finally, armor. You are the armor that will protect their interests. Which doesn't really make sense, because both shield and armor are protecting the same thing. And everything is about the Sultansworn. Literally, an Oath of the Sultansworn Paladin never cares about anyone other than the Sultan. That is it. Which, if you're not familiar with who the Sultan is, it's effectively the leader of Ul'dah, which is one of the city-states in Final Fantasy XIV. So, the tenets of the Sultansworn need to be modified. Especially since Paladins in Final Fantasy XIV almost never deal with the Sultan. Ever. Like, part of the Paladin questline is the fact that the Sultansworn Paladins have kind of been kicked out of the King's service when you first get the class, and you have to kind of deal with that. And then most of the expansions of Final Fantasy XIV have nothing to do with Ul'dah. Like, you almost never go back to Ul'dah, which sucks, because Ul'dah is my favorite city-state. I like it a heck of a lot more than Limsa Lominsa, which everybody loves, and everybody's at Limsa Lominsa, but Ul'dah is cooler and it has better music. But Heavensward, you go to a completely different country and help them in a civil war. Stormblood, you literally go and help a rebellion against the Garlean Empire and help an occupied country break its occupation. And then Shadowbringers, spoiler alert, you go to a different dimension, effectively, and deal with them. So, yeah. Tens of the Sultansworn need to be modified. Specifically, I think... they really should go back to the Paladin quest line and look at the specific dialogue and stuff like that, and try and pick out some ideals that are not items. Even if they do mention that you are a shield, you are a sword, things like that in the quest line, break away from the items and talk about things like again, if we go back to the tenets of redemption: peace, innocence, patience, wisdom. These are ideals. So if you want to do something, fealty would be an ideal. And in the idea of Tenets of the Sultan Sword, where you are pledged to the service of the Sultan, fealty would be an ideal. An ideal that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. You swear fealty to a king, but you would also swear fealty to local lore. You may swear fealty to your friends or your family. Fealty is an ideal that would work a lot better than shield, but would still give a similar interpretation if that's the way you wanted to do it. So things like that. I'm not going to give examples of other tenets, because that really, I don't know the class well enough to give good tenets. But I would say fealty would make sense as replacing shield, and then sword and armor replace those as well. The reason why there are multiple tenets is different paladins can put emphases on different tenets as their particular one that they care about the most. While all of them are part of being a paladin, again, every so often you may come into conflict where two of your tenets would have you do two different things, and you get to kind of choose which tenet am I going to follow more. So yeah. Next, you get to the oath spells. This is something in every paladin subclass. They get additional spells. You always have them prepared. They don't count against your prepared spells. They're just extra spells you can cast. A lot of paladins don't do a ton of casting because, again, they hold most of their spell slots for their smiting. But really useful oath spells are always useful. As far as fitting with the theme, this is the one that seems kind of weird. Because if we look at the tenets, shield, sword, armor, don't make sense, but whatever. How does detect poison and disease fit anywhere within shield, sword, armor? Heroism, that I can see. Find traps, doesn't make sense. Haste doesn't make sense, really. Locate creature, mass cure wounds, legend lore. The oath spells that they picked here, they just seem really, really well, really, really weird based on the tenets themselves. Now, if you look at mechanically what this class is supposed to be, which is, again, it's supposed to be a class that, takes hits. They don't make sense either, to be blunt. Heroism kind of makes sense. Haste to a point kind of makes sense because it does increase your armor class, and it gives you an additional action that you can use to help people out a little bit. Locate creature doesn't make sense. Mass cure wounds. When we talk about the rest of the features of the class, you will find out exactly why mass cures wounds doesn't make sense. Because this class is not built to heal other people, to be blunt. It is any healing needs to go to this class. And then legend lore is another one that mechanically just doesn't make sense. So this is probably the first time where I've looked at a bunch of oath spells, and while I don't think they're broken or anything, they just don't make sense to me. So yeah, do they need to be changed? I don't know. Like I said, it's not that I think they make the class better or worse. I just don't understand them. So that might be just a me problem where I'm not seeing a certain linking path to them. None of the oath spells actually explain why they are oath spells, so maybe this could be a unique thing where they actually talk about under oath spells, spells that encourage this or just something like that. It would be a lore explanation, but that'd be the only thing I could think of, because otherwise they just kind of look like random spells to me. But That being said, the other thing they get at the third level is they get their Channel Divinity. Now, Channel Divinity is not unique to the Paladin. It's actually a defining feature of the Cleric, but the Channel Divinity for the Cleric is very different from the Channel Divinity for the Paladin. The Cleric starts with one use of their Channel Divinity, but they get more uses as they go on, and they get all their uses back after a long rest. Channel Divinity for a Paladin is a one-and-done ability that refreshes on a short rest. So the Channel Divinity itself, while it uses effectively the same named mechanic, they react very, very differently between a Cleric Channel Divinity and a Paladin Channel Divinity. The two Channel Divinities that you have here are Cover and Ultimatum. Cover is, as an action, you... Another typo, it says you are create. I think it's just supposed to say you create. You create an ethereal link with a nearby ally. All damage that ally would take is received by you instead. This link lasts a number of rounds equal to your charisma modifier. You may break the link prematurely as a bonus action. The creature you are linked to must remain within 10 feet of you or the link is broken. So, as far as Channel Divinity options, this is kind of a unique Channel Divinity where you can take damage for another creature. This is not a unique thing in all of D&D. There actually are quite a few abilities, quite a few Paladin abilities that allow you to take some damage for another creature. I don't believe any of them allow you to take all damage for a creature, and all of them are reaction based, meaning they can only apply for a single attack. Cover doesn't for a number of rounds, meaning effectively because it's a charisma ability modifier, and a Paladin will probably eventually have a 20 charisma because it's their spellcasting ability, though it's not nearly as important as some other spellcasting ability modifiers are, because most of their kit involves attacking and not casting spells. But they will probably, bare minimum, they will probably have a +3 for their charisma. Generally, at least a +4 by the time they max the character. So for 4 rounds, which is the majority of combat, you have a character that is immune to damage. This doesn't exist in D&D anywhere. Other than 1 or 2 spells that are generally like 9th level spells. And they're concentration spells. So they are remarkably limited in their uses, though they're still super powerful. But again, we're talking about a 9th level spell versus a 3rd level ability that you get back on a short rest, whereas a 9th level spell you can only ever cast once per day. Even with the wizard's ability to recover spell slots, they cannot recover 9th level spell slots. So that, first, this is an extremely powerful ability. Second of all, this is a bad idea in a lot of situations. Because in order for this to work, you have to keep the creature within 10 feet of you, basically within 2 squares. That is within fireball formation. That is within every area attack possible. And because of that, this ability means the Paladin would take double damage from literally any area attack that happens. Because they would take damage for themselves. They would also take damage for the ally. And the damage is going to be the damage that they take. So on a saving throw, on ability that requires a saving throw, the Paladin is going to take damage based on how much damage that person they're linked to would take, not how much damage the Paladin would take. So if you take, I believe it's Shield Masters, a feat where you can superimpose your shield and take no damage from certain abilities if you make your save. That doesn't count for the person you're taking the damage. Whatever damage they would normally take, you're going to take instead, in addition to the damage that you're already taking. And in a situation where there are multiple creatures that have area attacks, the absolute smartest thing they could do is as soon as the Paladin uses the cover ability, everybody uses area attacks that include the Paladin and the person that they're covering, because they will down the Paladin before they can break the effect. So again, as much as it seems like a really cool ability, the Paladin itself is not built to be a hit point sponge. The defensive aspects of the Paladin are based around it having a high armor class and just not getting hits, as opposed to being able to take a lot of damage. The Barbarian is built around the idea of being a hit point sponge, where they get resistance to a lot of different damage to the types. If they take the Bear Totem, they get resistance to effectively all damage except for Psychic, I believe. Psychic and maybe Force damage. So Barbarians are meant to be hit point sponges. Paladins are meant to just not get hit by the attack. So this cover ability doesn't really work with how Paladins are built around. And again, it's an ability that doesn't currently exist in Dungeons and Dragons, because any creature with moderate intelligence would be able to exploit this from an enemy perspective and just kill the Paladin instantly. This isn't like in the reason this exists is there are abilities in Final Fantasy XIV and a lot of MMORPGs where you can just take damage for another character. I believe the Paladins actually have an ability like that, which is probably where this comes from. Again, I'm not an expert on it. I just played it up to 50. But with that idea, in Final Fantasy XIV, you have a dedicated character whose entire purpose is to keep the tank alive. So if they take extra damage, the healer can just up their healing for them. It's not really how Dungeons and Dragons work. Even if you have a dedicated healer, because it is turn-based as opposed to real-time, you cannot react if multiple creatures attack the same target, because your turn, you can have an ally go from full hit points to 0 hit points if the enemy is able to focus fire them in a really effective way. And when focus firing involves being able to hit one target for double the amount of damage, it makes it that much easier for them to do that. I like the idea of it. However, I think the fact that it just lasts, as opposed to being linked, like literally every other ability that allows you to take damage for an ally in D&D, all of it is linked to a reaction, where it will only work for a single attack. I think in this particular case, that's what this Channel Divinity should be. Is it should be you can use your reaction to take all the damage for an ally. And another thing that every other ability in the D&D mentions, and this one specifically doesn't, is to give you an example. Aura of the Guardian is an ability from the Oath of Redemption. And the end of where basically they can take half the damage for an attack for an ally that's in their aura. And at the end of it, it specifically says that this damage can't be reduced in any way. That is kind of the balancing factor of taking damage for an ally. Is if you're going to take damage for the ally, you're going to take all the damage for the ally. Now, again, the monk had that thing where they could specifically apply their resistance. I like that being a uniquely Rhalgr monk thing. It makes it more unique. And with this being a much more traditional thing that shows up in a lot of other paladin abilities, I think that has to be put in there as well, is the idea of this damage can't be reduced in any way. Because things like Heavy Armor Master allows you to take 2 damage off of any attack that hits you while wearing heavy armor. Stuff like that shouldn't really apply to this to Channel Divinity, just because that's how it kind of works. The second channel divinity is called Ultimatum. As an action, your body releases threatening energy in a 30-foot radius. All hostile creatures make a wisdom saving to the throw. On a failed save, the creature is provoked by you, having disadvantage on any battle actions against targets other than you for a number of rounds equal to your charisma ability modifier. On a successful saving throw, creatures are provoked for half as long, rounded down. So, this is another one that is not a brand new thing to 5th edition or even to Dungeons and Dragons. I've talked about 4th edition many times. 4th edition, the tanks of 4th edition were called Defenders, and they would have an ability called Mark. They would have an ability that would allow them, through a certain action, which was different for every class, they could mark a creature. And that creature would have a penalty anytime they attacked anyone other than the creature that marked them. And for, depending on the class, there would be other disadvantages to doing it. Like for the Sword Mage, which was a defender, when you marked a creature, if they did successfully attack another creature, the Sword Mage could either teleport the creature they marked to them and bop them, or teleport to that creature and bop them. So yeah, marking was a thing in 4th edition. It was how defenders were able to funnel damage to the defender as opposed to all their allies. And there were group marking mechanics. We get to 5th edition, the idea of marking a target went away and disappeared, which I think kind of sucked because it was a really cool thing. But it has shown up in, there was, I believe, in Xanathar's, there was 1 or 2 abilities that kind of mimicked marking. And I think in Tasha's, there's 1 or 2 abilities or spells that kind of mimicked marking. And I liked that I was coming back because it was a really interesting mechanic. Ultimatum is effectively a group mark. It is an incredibly powerful ability, and this one actually fits in with how a paladin protects allies from a mechanic standpoint. They have high AC, and their attempt is always going to be to have the enemy attack them instead of their allies, because they have a higher AC, can deal with it. If you build your paladin in a certain way, you can have like a 24 or a 25 AC without too much difficulty. Get some magic plate mail and a magic shield, and you have a really tough to hit character. So Ultimatum makes perfect sense. It is a super cool idea. The only quote-unquote issue with it is you need to know what you're doing when you use it, because again, because D&D is not a real-time thing like Final Fantasy XIV is, if you use Ultimatum and literally every enemy attacks you at the same time, basically uses their turn to attack you, you may drop very quickly before any of your allies can help you. And there's nothing on this about it ending when you lose consciousness. So a dungeon master might say, okay, as long as you are alive, this thing is still happening. Once a creature dies, they are no longer have any classes in anything. They are dead. So I would say bare minimum this would end on death, but that would mean enemies would come up and keep attacking your unconscious corpse while Ultimatum is on, because there's nothing in it about requiring any sort of concentration or being conscious for it to exist. So this would be a really good way to make you roll a new character. I would say put on there this ability ends if you are rendered unconscious. But yeah, overall, cover needs to change, because it literally is just asking for your paladin to be knocked unconscious constantly. Ultimatum, you just have to be careful when you use it. If you use it effectively, using Ultimatum in a situation where certain enemies are physically incapable of getting to you to attack you can be a really effective way to mess around with action economy. It was one of the things that as a sword mage you wanted to do, because the benefit of marking someone was being able to get an extra attack for free when they attack someone else. So generally what a sword mage would do is a sword mage would mark someone really far away that could not get to them, and then they would attack another creature. And so when the other creature couldn't attack them, they would attack someone else, and then the sword mage would, either teleport them over or teleport to that creature and get a free attack in. That was part of the method of playing a sword mage, was marking creatures that couldn't possibly act on that mark, so you could just get your benefit. And that is a really creative way and a really useful way to use ultimatum, is use ultimatum and then get to a position where none of those creatures can attack your paladin, or very few of those creatures can attack your paladin. And that means you've effectively given them disadvantage on all their attack rolls for a number of turns. Combining this with grappling or any ability that reduces movement speed, working with allies to reduce movement speed and things like that, this can be an extremely effective way to really protect your party by simply giving all of your enemies disadvantage on all their attack rolls because they can't attack the paladin. But again, if you use it poorly, you're just asking for your paladin to die. So that is all of the third level of abilities. At 7th level, you get Aura of the Divine Veil. Allies within 10 feet of you are protected by Divine Veil. As a reaction, you may choose to redirect half the damage an ally would receive to yourself. At 18th level, the range of this aura increases to 30 feet. Auras are not a quote-unquote defining feature of the Paladin because they don't show up until 5th level, but they are a definitive aspect of the Paladin class going back to its inception. Paladins have always had these aura abilities in D&D, and the one that's most famous is an anti-fear aura, where if you're close to a paladin, you can't be affected by the fear condition. And it is really, as much as people never think about it until they have to deal with a creature that uses fear, it is by far one of the most useful things ever when it's necessary. Auras are really interesting. They're really cool. They really can turn your paladin into a different kind of thing. With the fear aura specifically, once you are in the aura, you cannot have fear. So one of the things that I have seen in many games where they're dealing with creatures that fear is a paladin when the aura is only 10 feet, because it doesn't get to 30 feet until much, much later. When a paladin is in the party and someone else gets fear, literally the paladin just moves so that they're within 10 feet of the creature and then moves back. So just briefly being in that aura gets rid of the fear. And as soon as they leave, the fear doesn't come back. They cannot have the fear condition, so the condition goes away. And because nothing is imposing the condition, because the thing that caused the fear is a one-time action, the fear condition just dissolves. And so depending on the aura, because different subclasses in that have different auras that they do, I have seen paladins very effectively go around and just kind of move so that they remove conditions from allies just because of their auras. This one's not going to quite work like that because it's linked to a reaction. But again, this kind of goes a little bit against the idea of how paladins protect their allies in D&D specifically, but it's not a bad ability, and it's actually not. It's not unique. Again, the Oath of Redemption, their aura of Guardian is when a creature within 10 feet of you takes damage, you can use your reaction to magically take that damage instead of the creature taking it. So this is an example of taking all the damage of another character. So that does exist. But again, it is limited to a single reaction. And specifically, this damage can't be reduced in any way. So Aura of the Divine Veil is effectively Aura of the Guardian, but it's only half damage instead of all the damage. Which I'm fine with. I personally think for this particular flavor of Paladin, I think that's better because with how cover is already listed, you are already going to be going through crap tons of hit points. Taking only half the damage instead of all the damage is still going to be a huge benefit to your allies, but you're not going to be burning through your hit points like crazy, which is going to be the biggest downfall of this class, is going to be they're going to run out of hit points constantly because of how much the class is built around taking other people's damage. And because of that, it's actually going to force other players in your party to commit to a different playstyle than they normally would. When having a Sultansworn Paladin in your party, you are almost required to have a dedicated healer, because every turn, if the Paladin is making use of their subclass abilities, every turn they need a heal. So you're going to be severely limiting whomever else is in your party to, I always have to heal the Paladin, because they're always going to be low on hit points, and everyone is going to be gunning for them, because that's what this class is built around. So yeah, Aura of the Divine Veil, I think it's really it's a useful ability. I don't think there's anything broken about it. Just when it combines with the channel Divinity and the other stuff that's built around this class, you have to be kind of careful about using it. So yeah. Going to 15th level, you get Shield Oath. Using your reaction, you may spend 1 hit die to reduce the attack roll by the results of the roll. This seems like a really simple thing, but it has really grave consequences. First things first, hit die for the Paladin is a D10. So using your reaction at 15th level, you have 15 hit die. Now, again, this Paladin's going to be going through hit points like crazy. So on short rest, it may be healing itself and using a hit die a fair amount. So that is a slightly limiting factor to this. But there are so many other ways that you can heal hit points that using your hit points or using your hit die as a quote unquote limited resource to be able to reduce an attack by up to 10 is broken, to say the least. Now, the idea behind this comes from how a Paladin works in Final Fantasy XIV. They're a shield-based class. They're the only class that uses a shield. But because of that, one of the ways they deal with damage is they mitigate damage. And one of the ways they do that is they have a chance to block. And blocking in Final Fantasy XIV reduces the damage of an attack by generally by about 20%. The numbers fluctuate depending on your shield block chance and all that, things like that. But numbers wise, at max level, it's around 20% of the damage it reduces. In D&D, if you block an attack, the attack doesn't hit and you take 0 damage. So there is a huge difference between taking 80% of the damage and taking 0 damage. Combining that with the fact that the highest AC in the game is, I believe, a 24 is the highest AC monster in the game. And you roll a d20 to attack. So as long as you have a +5, you can hit any creature in the game. So you only need 5 points is the difference between hitting the most armored creature in the game and not. Being able to reduce an attack roll by 10 is massive. The range of ACs in D&D goes from base AC is 10. There are some creatures that have a 9 or an 8 AC. They're relatively rare. But basically you go 8 to about 24. That is the entirety of the ranges of AC in 5th edition to D&D. 10 is almost half of that range. This is an unbelievably powerful ability that does work with how the Paladin is meant to block attacks, which is by having a high AC. But because it uses your reaction, this effectively means this Paladin is almost never going to take their own damage. They're always going to take damage from their allies, which again makes the rest of the abilities in here a little bit more manageable, because if you're never taking your own damage, then taking everyone else's damage isn't nearly as bad for you. However, again, this is only going to work on attack rolls. It doesn't work on things with saving throws. There simply isn't an ability like this in the game right now because it is kind of broken. I would much rather see this linked. Basically, have this modify Divine Smite. If this is going to be a defensive paladin, which it obviously is, have this modify Divine Smite. Make this Shield Smite. Let's call it Shield Smite. That makes perfect sense. And the way that it works is when you are hit with an attack roll, you can burn a spell slot to increase your AC against that attack as a reaction. Effectively, you increase your AC by a number equal to twice the level of the spell slot you use. So if you burn a first level spell slot, you increase it by 2. If you burn a 5th level spell slot, you would increase it by 10. And since Divine Smite loses... Divine Smite doesn't get any better after fourth level spell slots, we would limit this to a +8. So it's not nearly as high as that, and it also requires you burning a 4th level spell slot, which is a really powerful spell slot to get that +8. Again, it actually references something in the base class, which nothing so far in this subclass has had anything to do with any of the defining features of the Paladin. This so far, this could have been a class unto its own because it has nothing to do with the Paladin thus far other than the name. And I'm not saying that's a horrible, horrible thing, but there should be something in there that references or improves something from the base class. So I think Shield Oath should be Shield Smite, and it basically allows you to increase your AC against attacks. Because it, just like a Paladin Smite, because it requires you to get hit by an attack, you know the attack roll that has been made against you. So you're never going to have to worry about wasting a spell slot because you're not sure what the attack roll is. You will know the attack roll. You'll know the exact spell slot you need to burn in order to make the attack go away. I think that would work a lot better. It fits a little bit better with how the Paladin works. And it gives that feeling of how the Paladin works in Final Fantasy XIV, where they are a shield-based thing and they're constantly blocking attacks and things like that. Shield Smite would fit better than this Shield Oath would and not be nearly as broken. Finally, at 20th level, you have Hallowed Ground. Now, 20th level Paladin abilities are my favorite abilities in the game because I call them transformation abilities because in general, 20th level Paladin abilities, most of them last for a minute. And they let you just do cool ass shit for a minute. Like my personal favorite, the Oath of Vengeance Paladin becomes an avatar of vengeance. They grow wings, they have an aura that scares people, and they fly around just doing crazy amounts of damage. It's the coolest thing ever. I love that transformation ability, and each Paladin oath is different. Most of them, not all, most of them get this really cool transformation ability. So Hallowed Ground, if it follows the pattern of other ones, will be a transformation ability, which, spoiler alert, it is. As an action, you create a barrier which blocks all damage for a number of rounds equal to half your charisma ability modifier rounded down. You must then finish a long rest to use Hallowed Ground again. First things first, equal to half your charisma ability modifier rounded down. It's 2. Just say for 2 rounds. I've gotten to the point now that I've seen this so many times because it was a big thing in the PHB that I'm over it. For a max level ability, if you are tying it to an ability modifier, don't use tied to your charisma ability modifier. It's going to be maximized. Just say +5, or in this case, +2. It is just 2. It is for 2 rounds. There is not a single paladin that will get to level 20. I can't speak anymore. That will get to level 20 as an Oath of the Sultansworn Paladin that will not have a 15. That will not have a 20 charisma modifier. They will all have a 20 charisma modifier. This just means it lasts for 2 rounds. This again is an ability that doesn't exist in 5th edition. Aside from there is a spell. It is a 9th level spell I'm actually going to look it up because I can't actually remember what it's called. But it's a 9th level spell, and it's a doozy. It is such a killer spell. Hold on, I have to find it here. Hold, please. Invulnerability. It's called Invulnerability. It lasts for 10 minutes, and it says you're immune to all damage until the spell ends. It is a 9th level spell. So again, this is a spell that you don't get access to, I believe, until 18th or 19th level. It requires a small piece of adamantine worth at least 500 gold pieces, which the spell consumes. So it is actually, it actually requires a very specific item that is remarkably difficult to find in the game. So there are a lot of limitations on this. And it's a concentration spell that lasts for 10 minutes. It's super, super useful, but it's also remarkably simple to get rid of. A high level Dispel Magic would get rid of it. An Anti-Magic Field would get rid of it. They're immune to all damage, so forcing a concentration check because of damage is impossible while it's on. But if there's another way you can force a concentration check, of which there are many abilities, you can get rid of invulnerability. And because it is a concentration spell, that wizard, warlock, whoever is using it, actually it's limited to the wizard class, and it actually didn't show up till Xanathar's. I didn't realize that. So only wizards can cast it. And they are, it is impossible for them to cast another concentration based spell. And if they do, they immediately lose their invulnerability, of which there, again, a good portion of spells are concentration. So comparing Hallowed Ground with invulnerability is kind of night or day. This only lasts for 12 seconds, but if you combine it with Cover or Ultimatum, you literally have given your team 2 rounds of no damage. If you do it with Cover, you have created 2 allies that are completely immune to damage. And then combine it with Aura the Divine Veil, basically that means up to 3 people that get hit by damage are completely immune to damage for 2 turns. For me, even with it being a 20th level ability, it's broken. Again, there are so many things that prevent a wizard from using invulnerability, including it being a 9th level spell. It requiring a very, very specific material component that is very difficult to find and has monetary value. The fact that it's concentration. The fact that they only learn, I believe, 1 or 2 9th level spells in their entire career, and the likelihood of them finding a 9th level spell on a scroll or in a wizard spellbook is almost infinitesimally small. You have to sacrifice a lot to be able to use invulnerability. There really isn't a sacrifice for Hallowed Ground. You just become immune to damage for 2 turns. It's nice that it's limited to 2 turns, but it's still just unbelievably overpowered. Now, the reason this exists is, again, in Final Fantasy XIV, there are these holy shit mechanics for every tank. Every tank has a holy shit button. My personal favorite one is still Super Butt Clench, which is the Gunbreaker one. It's actually Super Bolide, but Zeppela calls it Super Butt Clench, and I can't think of it another way. Because the way that it works, all these holy shit buttons, what they do is they're meant, if there's a situation that you see that you are not going to survive an attack, this will let you survive it always. You will survive this attack, and the way that it works for the Gunbreaker with Super Bolide is it reduces your hit point to 1, which you go from like 10,000 hit points to 1 hit point in an instant, but you're immune to damage for like 10 seconds. And the reason they call it Super Butt Clench is when the healer watches the tank's hit points go from like half full to 0, they freak out and think they've just lost their tank. So it's fun. The Paladins is, I believe it's called Hallowed Ground, and it's literally that. You're immune to damage for for a set amount of time. That's it. You just become immune to damage. There is no downside to it. You're just immune to damage. Compared to like the Gunbreaker one, you're reduced to 1 hit point. The Dark Knight one, basically, it doesn't make you immune to damage. What it does do is it doesn't let you die. What will happen is you activate your ability, and if a blow would take you to 0 hit points, you just don't die, and the ability like activates. Like you push the button, and then it triggers once you get down to 0 hit points. But if the healer does not heal you to full before the effect ends, you die. And then I don't know what the warrior one is, to be blunt. I for the life of me, I can't remember. So that's why Hallowed Ground is there. And again, in an MMORPG, this makes perfect sense because everything is done in real time. For D&D, this is an incredibly broken ability, especially when you combine it with everything else in the class. It effectively makes your party most of your party immune to damage for 2 rounds, which doesn't exist in D&D, especially since with Hallowed Ground, there is literally no way to stop it. Aside from an ability that insta-kills, or an ability, because even then, once it's activated, there's no way to end it. It doesn't end on unconsciousness or something like that, despite the fact that Hallowed Ground doesn't allow you to get unconscious because you blocks all the damage. Yeah, there literally is no way to stop this. So Hallowed Ground literally could be used any time to win a fight. This is a win condition ability because your allies no longer have to worry about anything. They can just go ham on the enemy, knowing, and not even just when this ability is active, knowing that ability is coming. Your party can literally just sit there and let people attack them. And when it gets to the point where things are looking rough, Paladin pops Hallowed Ground, and your allies can finish off anyone they haven't killed thus far. It literally would change the playstyle of the entire party to be based around, do we have Hallowed Ground available or not? So, that being said, how can we translate a holy shit button to D&D? And this is another thing where I will make an emphasis on the idea of in Final Fantasy XIV, all DPS have their own version of the same abilities for the most part. You have, the monk version of this attack versus the ninja version of this attack, but they're still basically the same attacks. All the healers have a group heal. They all have their own flavor of the same abilities. That goes 100% against 5e class design. In 5th edition, every class is designed to be unique. You don't get the same ability broken down. Every class gets their own flavor of the same ability. There are certain abilities or certain effects that some classes share, but they tend to be the exception to the rule rather than the rule itself. So with Hallowed Ground, you are effectively going, okay, how do we make the holy shit button for Paladins? How do we give Paladins the same ability that Gunbreakers and Dark Knights and Warriors all have? And that is not a mindset you should have in 5th edition. So, because we haven't dealt with this particular aspect of the Final Fantasy XIV Paladin, and because it would relate it would relate to an aspect of the D&D Paladin that has been talked about, let's change Hallowed Ground. Move it away from a holy shit button and turn it into the other thing that make Paladins impossible to kill. They have a full heal ability, which is super, super useful in Final Fantasy XIV. I can't remember the name of the ability. They don't have it by level 50 because I've never used it on my Paladin. But they have an ability to effectively fully heal themselves. And if I remember correctly, they can actually cast it on other characters as well. So they have a one-time use full heal, and it's super, super useful. Paladins in D&D have a healing ability. They have Lay on Hands. Like I said before, Lay on Hands is a really useful ability that is really underutilized by most paladins because they focus on Channel Divinities and Divine Smite. So instead of emulating the Holy Shit button, which we already have in the Dark Knight and we already have in the Gunbreaker, and again, we don't need the same ability for every single quote-unquote tank class. Every class is supposed to be unique in 5th edition. Let's focus on tie their 20th level ability to their Lay on Hands ability. So we can still make it a transformation, because I like transformations. They're super cool. And visually, the Paladin is super, like, they are over the top with just how grand some of their abilities are. And they just released the ability showcase for Endwalker, and the Paladin gets even more just super grand, amazing shit they get to do. They just look pretty constantly. And I'm not talking about just armor. I mean, the effects of their abilities just look badass. So, for the Paladin, I don't. I will defer to Soren as far as what they want to call it. Because I'm certain they can come up with a better name than I can that has a connection to Final Fantasy XIV. But what I'm thinking is one of the things, one of the coolest abilities the Paladin has currently is they do this thing where they bring up their shield and they effectively have wings come out from their body. And anyone that's standing in this kind of V-shaped protection area is protected from damage. It is a massively cool ability. It requires your party to actually move into the right spot to be able to be protected from it. Or if you're a good paladin, you just position yourself so that most of your party is covered, and the ones that are outside get the idea of, oh, I should go there. So I say have these wings of light sprout from the paladin. Because it's a transformation ability, let's give them the ability to hover, meaning they're immune to difficult terrain and things like that. They now hover, a few feet off the ground as this happens, and are immune to difficult terrain. They can now use Lay on Hands at range, and they can target up to 2 creatures simultaneously. Actually, no. To make this even cooler, not 2 creatures simultaneously. They can use Lay on Hands as a bonus action up to 30 feet away. So, when they activate this ability, they start floating. They sprout their wings. Their bonus action becomes heal with Lay on Hands. And their main action, and you know what? Because Lay on Hands is still limited to your hit point pool. Yeah, let's say they can target 2 allies simultaneously, and if they target someone simultaneously, they only burn hit points from the pool as if they were healing 1. So if they give 5 hit points to one person, their total Lay on Hands pool is reduced by 5. If they give it to 2 people at the same time, using the same bonus action, it's still only reduced by 5, but it heals 2 people for 5 hit points. I think that would be much, much cooler. I think it actually it emulates a cool aspect of the Final Fantasy XIV Paladin, something that is well known in the community and is talked about as part of the Paladin, because you just can't kill him. And it's not massively broken or anything like that. And it allows you to do something you currently can't do. You get to use your Lay on Hands as a bonus action, which means you still get to use your action for the cool paladin shit, like Divine Smite and stuff like that. Action economy-wise, it's giving you a really powerful use of your bonus action. Yeah. The only issue I see with that is you only have 100 hit points you can use. So I'd also say when you activate the ability, if you have less than half of your total lay on hands pool available, it is increased to half of your total lay on hands pool. So in this particular way, that means that even if you're using lay on hands other times, which you should be, when you activate this, you have at least half of your lay on hands that you can use. So yeah, I think it works better. It's not nearly as broken as, hey, I'm immune to damage, and so is most of the rest of my party for 2 turns. And again, it still fits with the Paladin itself. It also fits a little bit better with how the Paladin just plays in the D&D 5e. So anyway, final thoughts. Overall, like I said, I'm not particularly sold on the Paladin. It's kind of come into the same problem that all of these classes have come, or all these subclasses have come into, is not understanding the base class and creating a subclass that relies entirely on Final Fantasy XIV and doesn't take into account D&D at all, which generally isn't going to work very well. Overall, the tenets need to be fixed because sword, shield, sword, and armor are not tenets; they're objects. So they need to be changed to actual ideals that they can live on by, instead of objects that they wear on their body. The oath spells, like I said, aren't broken or anything like that. They just don't make a ton of sense to me. They don't need to be changed or anything like that. They don't make sense. For Channel Divinity, cover is a great way to get your Paladin killed. So changing it to reaction based as opposed to just existing for a number of turns is kind of essential. If you want the Channel Divinity to be able to work for multiple turns, that's fine, but still make it a reaction to take the damage, because otherwise it's just going to kill your ally in general. Ultimatum is super cool. Has a lot of different uses beyond the idea of, hey, everyone attack me. It can actually almost be more useful to get to a place where they can't attack your Paladin, but still want to. Aura the Divine Veil works. Just works. Combined with cover, it becomes a little bit problematic because your Paladin is just going through way too many hit points, but could be worth. Shield Oath does not work. Being able to reduce attacks that much using a quote-unquote limited resource that you have 15 of every day is not something that's viable. My suggestion is change it into Shield Smite and make it basically be when you are hit by an attack, you can burn a spell slot to increase your AC by twice the level of the spell slot, up to +8. Meaning you can still burn a 5th level spell slot if you want to, but it will only give you a maximum benefit of +8. In the same way that for Divine Smite, you can burn a 5th level spell slot for a Divine Smite, but it will give you the same additional damage you would get from burning a 4th level spell slot. And then Hallowed Ground, change it to be something healing related. Whatever you want to name it is fine. I don't know the Paladin well enough to know what to name it. But basically, they sprout wings from their back and hover above the ground, making them immune to difficult terrain and any abilities that would cause damage by traveling over to terrain. As a bonus action, it lasts for a minute. As a bonus action, they can use Lay on Hands on a creature within 30 feet of them instead of within 5 feet of them. And whenever they use Lay on Hands in this way, they can target a second creature within 30 feet of themselves to get the same amount of healing without using additional Lay on Hands points. And if their Lay on Hands pool is less than half, it is increased to half their total Lay on Hands hit points when the ability is activated. So those are my ideas. Yeah, overall, like I said, I like Paladins. The Sultansworn, I think, lore-wise, doesn't really it doesn't really thrill me. Mechanics wise, I think it could be fun. But the mechanics don't seem to lend themselves very much to the lore, which for paladins is a weird thing. Paladins are very lore focused. So doing a little bit more, possibly just modifying the tenets would make the class flow a lot better. But beyond that, like I said, mechanically, I think with a few changes, it could be a fun class to play. But overall, it is not my favorite class or subclass that I've seen in here thus far. Anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, turn on notifications in the comments down below. What I would like in the comments down below, give me your ideas for Tenets of the Sultansworn. You don't have to give me 3 or 4. You can just give me 1 if you want. But give me an example of a Tenet of the Sultansworn that you think would work for this. Whether you know it or not, whether you know the Final Fantasy XIV class or not, give me an idea of different tenets you think would fit. I think that'd be cool. So put those in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today. I will see you guys in the next time. All right? Bye-bye.